Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the time this afternoon. I'm sorry you're not going to get the benefit of the posters I brought down here with me, because I'm talking about a topic that is not one we bring up a lot in this chamber. It's the use of the congressional frank. Now, you were elected to Congress. The only thing you knew about the frank is that perhaps you cussed it from time to time when it showed up in your mailbox. I brought a copy down here because I'm not sure that I'm sure there's going to be staff and folks back in the office who hadn't seen one before, folks walking around the office buildings today. But, you know, the frank, the congressional frank, why they call it the frank, I do not know, but is that signature that you and I put up in the top right-hand corner of our envelopes so that we can send mail. And I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you have gone to town hall meetings where this hasn't come up, I would be interested to know, because on that list of congressional perks, and you know the ones I'm talking about, ones like you get free health care for life, which of course is not true. Ones like if you serve one term in Congress, you get a free pension for life, also not true. But among those perks is the free mail perk, the congressional frank. It drives me crazy, Mr. Speaker. It drives my constituents crazy, and we have the power to fix it here in this chamber. I want to stop the frank. Now, folks might say, if you want to stop the frank, why not just stop using the frank? Fair enough. It's because the law requires us to use it. I'm going to get to that later, Mr. Speaker, because I will bet you've not seen that code section before. Here's an article from Bloomberg, Mr. Speaker, lest you think this is something that you and I just hear at town hall meetings. This is something that is out, and you see it in newspaper after newspaper after newspaper. Headline, this is 2 summers ago, Bloomberg, lawmakers intent on dictating how the U.S. Postal Service cuts billions from its spending are among those helping themselves to a favorite congressional perk, free mail. Now, I want to be clear. There is no free mail. There is no free mail in the United States Congress today. This frank that I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, every time you sign your name at the top of a letter, you're paying the full freight on that letter. You're absolutely going to pay for it when it hits the Postal Service. Sometimes it's on the honor system that you're reporting it. Sometimes the mail house here at the Capitol is counting it. There is no free mail, but even a group as reputable as Bloomberg believes that there is. And I know with certainty, because I hear it from my folks back home, our constituents believe that there is. In this time where trust is the commodity that is in the tightest supply in this town, we must do those things to restore trust with men and women back home. We must end this favorite of congressional perks. Now, this is Bloomberg 2012, Mr. Speaker. I don't want you to think this is something that we've just started talking about. You can't see it from where you sit, but I also brought the New York Times from March of 1875. That's right, March of 1875, the New York Times is chronicling a vote that was taken right here in the U.S. House of Representatives. Well, not right here in this building. It was taken in this floor. It was taken through those doors and into the next chamber. But it says this. It says, by a vote of 113 to 65, the House concurred in the Senate amendment of the Postal Appropriations Bill to restore the franking privilege. Now, the franking privilege, this signing of your name on a letter, it came from England. And it came in the early days of the Postal Service, where maybe you had an important governmental responsibility. Maybe you needed to communicate with folks on the other side of the country, and there was no local post office close by. You could be living out on the frontier. You could be far away. You just might not have had a coin in your pocket. And so it allowed, in the name of government efficiency, for members of Congress to sign their name at the top of a letter and drop that into the postal stream. Well, I promise you, there is not a man or woman who serves in Congress today who does not know where their local post office is. There is not a man or woman who serves in Congress today who struggles to get over to the grocery store where there are stamps for sale. We do not need to be able to sign our name at the top of an envelope today to get it done. But in 1875, after Congress had abolished the frank in the name of abolishing congressional perks, the Senate passed a bill to bring it back into being. The House concurred. New York Times says this, so far as our observation goes, there has never been any demand for the restoration of the franking nuisance except on the part of congressmen. I want you to think about that. Where does this sense that Congress gets free mail privileges come from? Mr. Speaker. It comes from the fact that once upon a time, Congress actually got free mail privileges. Again, the Postal Service was in its infancy, and in order to conduct the people's business, the franking privilege was adopted from what folks had seen at play in England. In 1975, Congress was still trying to grapple with the distrust that the franking privilege created amongst its constituency. Again, New York Times, March 1875, so far as our observation goes, there has never been any demand for the restoration of the franking nuisance except on the part of congressmen. Well, Mr. Speaker, what I hope you will help me carry to our colleagues is that we no longer need that franking nuisance. There will be men and women in this chamber who'll say, Rob, what's the big deal? Don't we have bigger problems to struggle with? Of course we do. Of course we do. But this one is easy for us to fix. There are those men and women out there who believe that there is a congressional perk that exists in this chamber in a time of record budget deficits that no other American has access to, and we can abolish it with the stroke of our pen right here in the House. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is something that has plagued me and my conscience in a way that I just wanted to stop using it. I just wanted to start buying stamps. Now, I want you to think about micromanagement in this institution, Mr. Speaker. My plan was, radical plan. I was going to buy a stamp and send a letter. Well, lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, it turns out that's against the rules. I have a copy here of the Members' Congressional Handbook from this Congress. And it says postal expenses can be incurred only when the frank is insufficient. That means for the whole code section that tells you what the frank can be used for, only if you're outside of that code section can you put a stamp on. I've highlighted here, Mr. Speaker, postage may not be used in lieu of the frank. Here it is, Mr. Speaker, large print, my name at the top of a letter. It embarrasses me every time it goes out the door because I know even when I'm doing the people's business, which I am doing with each and every letter that goes out the door, responding to constituent concerns, answering constituent questions, folks do not feel served on the other end. They feel reminded that perhaps there's one set of rules for Congress and one set of rules for everybody else. But the rules that we have agreed to live by in this body prohibit me from buying a stamp and sending that letter out instead. The good news is, Mr. Speaker, turns out when the law is not written the way the law ought to be written, that my constituents have empowered me with a voting card with which to change it. And I've partnered with my friend Tammy Duckworth from Illinois, Democrat on the other side of the aisle, and together we are going to stop the frank. We are going to abolish this so-called congressional perk, this free mailing privilege, this bane and stain in this chamber that folks have been fighting to get rid of for over 100 years. We are going to do it. Mr. Speaker, I'm not optimistic enough to believe that this can be done alone. That's why I have a fantastic partner on the Democratic side of the aisle, and that is why she and I together are going to those groups around this town who care about congressional accountability in order to make them our partners in this effort. I have quotes from two of them. If you sit on the right-hand side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, the National Taxpayers Union is certainly a group that you know and respect. You've certainly heard their appeal is certainly bipartisan, but I know it has credibility on the right. And the National Taxpayers Union says this: repealing the so-called franking privilege is a fair and simple reform that will introduce pay-as-you-go budgeting to one of the most basic units of government, the congressional office. Check, they're on board. Now, if you're on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, I know Public Citizen is a group that speaks to you with integrity. Now, again, Public Citizen is a bipartisan group. They speak to folks on both sides of the aisle. Public integrity is their mission, and Public Citizen says this: Public Citizen heartily supports the Woodall-Duckworth legislation to rein in the abuse of taxpayer-funded franked mail for members of Congress and applauds your work of making this common-sense legislation come from across party lines. We can do this. And here's my frustration as a 3-year member of this House, Mr. Speaker, and I know it's your frustration. You can't do the big things. You can't do the big things without each other. And it's tough to find one another when you haven't been able to do the little things together that build the trust. Trust is the commodity that's missing. It's not just missing between our constituents and this chamber. Mr. Speaker, you know it is often missing within this chamber. And we must seize upon opportunities, big and small, to come together to do those things that we know are the right thing to do. Now, I'll say to my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, because I know there are going to be folks back in their office watching who say, hey, wait a minute, don't we have a whole list of rules about the do's and don'ts of sending mail from a congressional office? We do. We do. Those rules and regulations are housed in what's called the Franking Commission today. It's actually the Committee on Mail Standards. And I don't propose to abolish a single one of those. Those rules, for folks who don't know, are designed to prevent people from campaigning on the taxpayer dime out of their official office. Now, there are folks in this chamber who might like to abolish those rules too. That is not my fight. The standards that prevent members from abusing the mail in their office, that prevents them from campaigning out of their office, all of those standards to try to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being targeted only at those taxpayer-required needs, those will remain in place. But this, Mr. Speaker, this signature at the top of a letter that suggests to every American that somehow when you get elected to Congress, the rules no longer apply to you, big rules and small rules like licking a stamp. And now you don't even have to lick the stamps anymore, right? You just peel them off the self-stick now and stick them right on. We can do this. There's a low opinion that folks often hold of members of Congress, Mr. Speaker, but I believe we can buy stamps and stick them on letters. I believe that we can, but wait. There is nothing in what I propose that requires you to lick your own stamps or even stick your own stamps. If you want to get a postal permit device like every business in America has, by golly, run your office like a business. If we want to change the rules so that we use the penalty mail system, which is what the executive branch uses, what the White House would use, what the IRS would use, what the Justice Department would use, that says this is it's the same as a postage paid marker from a business, except it's a postage paid marker from a government. Fair game. But we're the only folks who run the show this way, and it's time for that to stop. I don't think folks understand how far it goes. You know, the franking privilege exists in statute. If I were to pass on my franking privilege, Mr. Speaker, goes to my wife. Did you know that? That if a member of Congress were to pass on, suddenly their spouse is allowed to start signing their names to letters and dropping them into the postal stream. Why is that? Why is this something that I can deed on after my demise? In fact, why is it something that exists at all? Well, the answer is, once upon a time, it was difficult to find a stamp. Can't we agree that those days are behind us? Well, Public Citizen can agree, and the National Taxpayers Union can agree, and Tammy Duckworth from Illinois can agree, and Rob Woodall from Georgia can agree. I know this is something that we can do together. Again, Mr. Speaker, I don't claim this is going to be the proposal that saves the world. It's not. But for every taxpayer who opens up the newspaper every day and does not find news about how their taxpayer dollars are being invested transformatively in the lives of children, invested transformatively for men and women harmed in the defense of this nation, but instead open up the newspaper and find story after story of waste, of fraud, and of abuse. Our role here in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, is to root that out and stop it wherever we may find it. But don't you believe before we can help someone else clean up their house, we must clean up our own house. Mr. Speaker, I encourage you to visit my webpage. You know it's woodall.house.gov, and then /Stop the Frank. Because if you and I don't, our colleagues, it's not going to rise to the level of action. It's just something that we can do. We can do it. We can do it right away. There's no need to delay. We can begin restoring faith one bit at a time. Let's restore faith with this today, another bill tomorrow, another bill the day after that, and one of these days we might find that the American people have trust and confidence in their Congress again. Wasn't true in 1875, and it may be optimistic to believe it could be true in 2015. But I am certain of this. If we know that we have opportunities and we fail to seize those opportunities, we will never earn, and I dare say deserve, the trust of our constituency back home. Mr. Speaker, send any of your constituents who are interested to woodall.house.gov, Stop the Frank. And in fact, encourage the folks that you see and interact with from other parts of the country to visit Stop the Frank, and then go encourage their congressmen and their congresswomen to be a part of this effort. This does not have to be a partisan issue, because it's not a partisan issue. This does not have to be a wait-and-see issue, because it's an issue we've been looking at for more than 100 years. What this can be is a get-it-done-together issue that, again, one small step at a time begins to earn the trust of the American people that I know each and every member of this chamber wants to earn. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.